The dry crackle of fallen leaves beneath Zara Whitfield's boots seemed deafeningly loud as she sprinted through the dense woods, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her lungs like fire. It was 1876, in the rugged foothills outside San Bernardino, California, and the setting sun cast long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the forest floor. The sound of men's voices behind her, 5 of them, all in pursuit, drove her forward despite the burning in her legs and the stitch in her side. "She went this way," one of them called out, his voice carrying through the trees. "Don't let her get away." Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had been traveling west on the stagecoach, finally free from the constraints of her old life in St. Louis, when everything had gone terribly wrong. The stage had been attacked just outside of San Bernardino by a gang of outlaws, and in the chaos, she'd managed to escape into the woods. But they had followed her, determined not to leave a witness. She stumbled over a fallen branch, barely catching herself against the rough bark of a pine tree. Her simple blue traveling dress was torn at the hem, her dark hair falling loose from its once neat bun. 23 years old and completely alone, Zara had never felt more terrified. The snap of twigs behind her grew closer. They were gaining on her. "Please, God," she whispered, pushing herself away from the tree and forcing her aching legs to continue. "Please help me." As if in answer to her desperate prayer, her foot caught on an exposed root, sending her sprawling face first onto the ground. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand, causing her to cry out in agony and frustration. The heavy footfalls behind her grew louder. Zara dragged herself behind a large boulder, pressing her back against the cold stone as tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. With nowhere left to run, she did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and desperate, echoing through the trees. In the distance, Zachary Morgan had been riding his paint horse along the edge of his property when he heard a woman's scream cutting through the quiet evening air. He pulled sharply on the reins, causing his horse to stop and paw at the ground nervously. "Easy, Scout," he murmured, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. At 28, Zach had spent the last 5 years carving out a place for himself in the foothills outside San Bernardino. After the war, he drifted west like so many others, eventually using his army savings to purchase a small ranch. He lived simply and kept to himself, preferring the company of horses to most people. The scream came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of men's voices. Without hesitation, Zach dug his heels into Scout's sides, urging the horse into a gallop toward the sound. The animal responded immediately, powerful muscles bunching as they raced through the trees, navigating the familiar terrain with ease. As he crested a small rise, Zach saw them 5 men closing in on a woman who was pressed against a boulder, her face a mask of terror. In an instant, he made his decision. "Hiya," he shouted, spurring Scout forward. The horse thundered down the slope, sending dirt and pebbles flying. Zach positioned himself directly between the woman and her pursuers, Scout rearing up dramatically as they came to a halt. With practiced ease, Zach drew his revolver, his expression hard as granite. "That's far enough, gentlemen," he said, his voice low and dangerous as he leveled the gun at the group. The men stopped abruptly, eyeing the newcomer with wariness. They were a rough-looking bunch, with dust-covered clothes and unshaven faces. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, stepped forward slightly. "This ain't your business, cowboy," he spat. "The lady and us have some unfinished matters." Zach's eyes narrowed. "Looks to me like the lady doesn't want anything to do with you." Behind him, Zara stared up at her unexpected savior with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The setting sun silhouetted him against the darkening sky, broad-shouldered and imposing atop his horse, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. "She saw something she shouldn't have," another of the men growled. "Can't let her go running to the law." 5 against 1 woman, Zach replied, contempt evident in his voice. "Real brave of you." The leader's hand twitched near his holster. "Now it's 5 against 1 man." You willing to die for a stranger? Zach's expression didn't change, but his grip on the colt tightened. I'm willing to put the first two of you in the ground before the rest even clear leather. Are you feeling lucky? A tense silence fell over the clearing. Zach could feel the woman's gaze on him, could almost sense her ragged breathing. Finally, the leader made a quick calculation and took a step back. This isn't over, he said, his voice a low threat. You just bought yourself some trouble, mister. Wouldn't be the first time, Zach replied evenly. With reluctant nods to their leader, the men began backing away, disappearing into the growing shadows of the forest. Only when they were completely out of sight did Zach holster his weapon and turn his attention to the woman. He dismounted in one fluid motion, leading Scout by the reins as he approached her cautiously. Up close, he could see she was young and clearly well-bred despite her disheveled appearance. Her eyes, a striking blue-gray like the sky before a storm, watched him warily. Are you hurt, miss? He asked, his tone gentler now. Zara swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. My ankle, she managed. I think I twisted it when I fell, Zach nodded, keeping a respectful distance. My name's Zachary Morgan. I have a place about a mile from here. I can take you there, get that ankle looked at, if you'll allow it. Zara hesitated, weighing her options. This man had just saved her life, but he was still a stranger in a dangerous land. Yet the alternative, remaining alone in the woods with night falling and those men possibly returning, was unthinkable. Zara Whitfield, she offered finally. And yes, thank you, Mr. Morgan. I would be grateful for your assistance. Zach nodded, noting the cultured Eastern accent. Can you stand? He asked. Zara attempted to rise, but pain shot through her ankle, causing her to wince and fall back against the boulder. Without further discussion, Zach stepped forward, offering his arm. Lean on me, he said simply. When she took his arm, he could feel her trembling, though whether from fear, cold, or exhaustion he couldn't tell. Probably all three, he reasoned. With his support, she managed to hobble a few steps, but it was clear she wouldn't be able to walk far. This isn't going to work, he said, frowning. With your permission, Miss Whitfield, I'll need to lift you onto my horse. Zara nodded mutely, too exhausted to argue about propriety. With careful movements, Zach lifted her, one arm behind her back and the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than he expected, and he could feel her stiffen at his touch before reluctantly relaxing against his chest. In one smooth motion, he set her atop Scout, adjusting her skirts for modesty before taking the reins and leading the horse on foot. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains now, the forest growing darker by the minute. Those men, Zach said as they began moving. What did they want with you? Zara's hands gripped the saddle horn tightly. I was on the stagecoach to San Bernardino, she explained, her voice still shaky. Those men attacked it about 5 miles back. The driver and the guard, she broke off, the memory clearly painful. They didn't make it. The passengers were robbed, but I managed to slip away in the confusion. They chased me because I saw their faces. Zach's jaw tightened. Stagecoach robbery wasn't uncommon in the territory, but killing witnesses was crossing a line that would bring the full force of the law down on them. You're safe now, he said, though he knew the words were inadequate. We'll get you to my place, and tomorrow I can take you into town to speak with the sheriff. They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft thud of Scout's hooves on the forest floor and the chorus of night insects beginning their evening songs. Zara tried to keep her composure, but the events of the day were catching up to her. Shock and exhaustion washed over her in waves, and she found herself swaying slightly in the saddle. Zach noticed immediately. Hold on, he said, concern evident in his voice. We're almost there. True to his word, they soon emerged from the trees into a small clearing. In the fading light, Zara could make out the outline of a modest cabin with a barn and corral off to one side. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, suggesting a fire had been lit earlier in the day. It's not much, Zach said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice, but it's solid and dry. It looks wonderful, Zara replied honestly, the prospect of shelter and safety nearly overwhelming after the terror of the past hours. He led Scout to the front of the cabin, then carefully helped Zara down from the horse. Her ankle protested as her foot touched the ground, and she swayed unsteadily. Without hesitation, Zach swept her up into his arms again. "I can manage," she protested weakly, though she made no real effort to resist. "No sense making that ankle worse," he replied matter-of-factly, pushing the cabin door open with his shoulder. Inside, the cabin was simple but surprisingly tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its embers still glowing faintly. A wooden table with 2 chairs stood in the center of the main room, while a curtained-off area in the back presumably led to sleeping quarters. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with provisions, and a few books were stacked neatly on a small desk. Zach gently set Zara down in one of the chairs. "I'll need to see to Scout, then I'll come take a look at that ankle. Will you be all right for a moment?" Zara nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. "Yes, thank you." When Zach returned a short time later, he found Zara struggling to stay awake, her head nodding forward before she jerked it back up. He moved quietly, stirring the fire back to life and adding a few logs before filling a basin with water from a pitcher. "Miss Whitfield," he said softly, kneeling before her with the basin and a clean cloth. "I need to tend to your ankle." Zara blinked rapidly, forcing herself back to alertness. "Of course," she murmured, extending her injured foot with some embarrassment. With unexpected gentleness for his large hands, Zach carefully removed her boot and rolled down her stocking just enough to examine the injury. The ankle was swollen and beginning to bruise, but when he probed it carefully, he found no evidence of a break. "Just a bad sprain," he concluded, dipping the cloth in the cool water and wrapping it around the injury. "Keep it elevated tonight, and it should be better by morning." "Thank you," Zara said, genuinely moved by his kindness. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Zach's expression darkened momentarily as he considered what indeed might have happened, but he quickly schooled his features back to neutrality. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, though they both knew that wasn't true. He rose and moved to a small cupboard, taking out a tin of coffee and some dried meat and biscuits. "It's not much of a meal, but it'll keep your strength up." As he prepared the simple food, Zara took the opportunity to study her rescuer more carefully. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. His face, now visible in the firelight, was handsome in a rugged way, strong jaw covered with a few days' stubble, straight nose, and eyes that seemed to shift between green and hazel depending on the light. His dark brown hair was a bit too long, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. "You live out here alone?" she asked, accepting the tin mug of coffee he offered. Zach nodded, taking the seat across from her. "Just me and the horses. I breed and train them, sell them to the army mostly. It's a good life, quiet. Don't you get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted its presumptuous nature. To her surprise, Zach didn't seem offended. He considered the question seriously, looking into his coffee as if the answer might be found there. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but after the war. I found I needed the quiet more than I needed company." The mention of the war sparked Zara's curiosity, but she sensed it wasn't a topic he wished to explore further. Instead, she asked, "Have you been in California long?" "5 years, he replied. "Came west after Appomattox. Worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to buy this place." He looked up at her. "What about you? What brings a lady like yourself all the way from the East?" Zara sipped her coffee, grateful for its warmth. "Is it that obvious I'm from back east?" The corner of Zach's mouth quirked up slightly. "Your accent gives you away. That and those boots weren't made for Western terrain." She glanced down at her impractical footwear and couldn't help but smile ruefully. "No, I suppose they weren't. I'm from St. Louis originally. After my parents died last year, there wasn't much keeping me there. I have an aunt in San Francisco who offered me a place to stay until I find my footing." "I'm sorry about your parents," Zach said quietly. Zara nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you, it's been difficult. But I'm determined to make a new start." "That takes courage," he observed, a new respect in his gaze. They fell into a companionable silence as they ate. The simple meal tasted better than any fancy dinner Zara could remember, hunger making the plain fare seem like a feast. When she had finished, exhaustion crashed over her again like a wave. Zach noticed her struggling to keep her eyes open. "You should rest," he said, standing and gathering their dishes. "You can take the bed, I'll sleep out here." Zara began to protest, but he shook his head firmly. "I insist. You've been through enough today." Too tired to argue, she allowed him to help her to the small bedroom at the back of the cabin. A narrow bed with a quilt stood against one wall, a chest of drawers against another. It was sparse but clean. "I'll be just outside if you need anything," Zach assured her, placing a pitcher of water and a cup on the small bedside table. "Mr. Morgan," Zara said as he turned to leave, "I don't know how to repay you for your kindness." He paused in the doorway, his expression softening slightly. "There's no debt, Miss Whitfield. Get some rest now." As the door closed behind him, Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind whirling with the day's events. She had left St. Louis seeking a new beginning, never imagining the peril she would face before even reaching her destination. And Zachary Morgan, the quiet, solemn cowboy who had risked his life for a stranger, was unlike anyone she had ever met. With these thoughts swirling in her tired mind, she lay down on the unfamiliar bed, not even bothering to remove her torn dress. Within moments, she was fast asleep. Outside in the main room, Zach added another log to the fire and settled himself in the chair, his revolver within easy reach. Those outlaws had given up too easily for his liking. Men like that didn't typically walk away from a fight unless they had a plan to come back on their own terms. He would need to remain vigilant tonight, and tomorrow they would have to make the journey into San Bernardino to alert the sheriff. He wondered briefly if the stagecoach company had already discovered the robbery and sent word to town. As the night deepened around the small cabin, Zach found his thoughts returning to the woman sleeping in his bed. She was clearly educated and refined, the kind of woman who should be attending society functions in San Francisco, not running for her life through the wilderness. Yet there was a quiet determination about her that he admired. And those eyes, stormy and deep, with a spark of resilience that even terror hadn't completely extinguished, shaking his head to clear it of such thoughts, Zach focused instead on the practical matters at hand. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, decisions that would need to be made. For now, his job was simple. Keep Zara Whitfield safe through the night. With that thought firmly in mind, he settled deeper into his chair, prepared for a long night of watchful waiting. Zara woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Pale morning light filtered through the single window, illuminating the simple room. The events of the previous day came rushing back, bringing with them a fresh wave of anxiety. The stagecoach, the robbery, the chase through the woods, and finally Zachary Morgan. She sat up slowly, wincing as she moved her injured ankle. It was still tender, but the swelling had gone down considerably overnight. Her dress was hopelessly wrinkled and torn in places, her hair a tangled mess. Zara sighed, wishing for a change of clothes and a proper bath, but knowing such luxuries would have to wait. A gentle knock at the door drew her attention. "Miss Whitfield," Zach's deep voice called, "are you awake?" "Yes," she replied, quickly smoothing her hair and skirts as best she could. "Please come in." The door opened and Zach entered, carrying a steaming mug. He looked as though he'd been up for hours already, his clothes fresh though well worn. The stubble on his jaw was perhaps a bit heavier than the day before, but otherwise he showed no signs of having spent an uncomfortable night in a chair. "Brought you some coffee," he said, setting the mug on the bedside table. "How's the ankle?" "Better, thank you," Zara said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I think I can walk on it today." Zach nodded, seeming pleased. "Good, I've got breakfast ready when you are. We should head into town after report what happened to the sheriff." "Likely there's already a search party out for the stagecoach." "Of course," Zara agreed, taking a sip of the coffee. It was strong and black, not at all what she was used to, but surprisingly comforting in its simplicity. "Mr. Morgan, would it be possible?" "That is, might I have some water for washing up?" A faint flush colored Zach's cheeks. "Already heating some on the stove. I'll bring it in with a cloth and some soap. It's not much, but it will be perfect," Zara assured him with a genuine smile. "Thank you." He nodded and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "There's a clean shirt of mine on the chest there if you'd like to change. It'll be big, but fresher than what you've got on." Before she could respond, he had stepped out, closing the door behind him. Zara glanced at the shirt he'd mentioned, a simple blue cotton work shirt, neatly folded. The thought of wearing a man's clothing was scandalous by St. Louis standards, but out here, practicality seemed to outweigh social conventions. A few minutes later, Zach returned with a basin of steaming water, a bar of simple soap that smelled faintly of lye, and a clean towel. He set them on the chest and quietly excused himself, giving her the privacy to wash and change. The warm water felt heavenly against her skin, washing away the dirt and fear of the previous day. She managed to untangle her hair with her fingers, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Zach's shirt was indeed far too large, but when tucked into her skirt and with the sleeves rolled up, it was passable. When Zara emerged from the bedroom, she found Zach at the stove, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. The savory aroma made her stomach growl, reminding her how little she had eaten the day before. He glanced up at her entrance, his eyes widening slightly before his expression returned to its usual calm reserve. "Feeling better?" "Much," she said, testing her weight on her injured ankle. It protested but supported her. "Though I'm afraid I've commandeered your shirt. Suits you better than me anyway," he replied with that same almost smile she'd noticed the night before. Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair: bacon, biscuits, and more of the strong coffee. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Zach spoke. "We should reach town in about 2 hours if we ride double," he said, his tone businesslike. "Scout can handle both of us for that distance easily enough." "You've been so kind already," Zara began. "I hate to impose further." "It's no imposition," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "Those men are still out there. I'm not about to let you make that journey alone." Zara couldn't argue with his logic, nor did she want to. The thought of traveling alone with those outlaws potentially still in the area was terrifying. "Thank you," she said simply. As they prepared to leave, Zach saddled Scout and helped Zara mount before swinging up behind her. The arrangement was intimate by necessity, his chest solid and warm against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. It was most improper, and yet Zara found she couldn't bring herself to mind. They set off at an easy pace, mindful of carrying double. The morning was clear and cool, the California sun not yet at full strength. The landscape was beautiful in the daylight: rolling hills covered in oak and pine, wildflowers dotting the meadows they passed. "It's lovely here," Zara commented, taking in the scenery. "That it is," Zach agreed. "Different from back east, but it grows on you." "How did you come to settle in this particular area?" she asked, genuinely curious about the quiet man behind her. There was a slight pause before he answered. "Luck, mostly. Was drifting through, took a job at the Henderson place about 10 miles from here. Old man Henderson's son had been killed at Shiloh, so he took a liking to me, being a veteran. When this parcel came up for sale, he loaned me part of the money to buy it. That was generous of him." "He was a good man," Zach said, a note of respect in his voice. "Passed on 2 winters ago. His daughter sold the ranch and moved back east." Zara sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. "And you've been here ever since, raising horses?" "That's right. Started with just Scout here and 2 mares. Now I've got a decent-sized operation. All things considered, Army contracts keep me afloat." As they talked, Zara found herself warming to this taciturn man. Beneath his reserved exterior was a person of principle and kindness, qualities she had found sorely lacking in many of the gentlemen of her acquaintance in St. Louis. About an hour into their journey, Zach suddenly pulled Scout to a halt, his body tensing behind her. "What is it?" Zara whispered, instantly alert. "Riders," he murmured, nodding toward a ridge about half a mile ahead. 5 of them." Zara's heart began to pound as she squinted against the sun. Sure enough, 5 horsemen were visible on the ridge, seemingly surveying the valley below. "Is it them?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Can't tell from this distance," Zach replied, his voice tight, "but I don't much like the coincidence." He guided Scout into a small copse of trees, providing them with cover while he considered their options. The main trail to San Bernardino continued directly past the ridge where the riders were positioned. "There's another way," he said finally. "It's longer, follows the creek through the canyon, rough going in places, but it'll keep us out of sight." "Let's take that route," Zara agreed immediately, the memory of her pursuers still too fresh. Zach turned Scout eastward, away from the main trail. The horse picked its way carefully down a slope toward a small stream that wound through the valley. They followed its course, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they entered a narrow canyon. The walls of rock rose steeply on either side, providing good cover but also limiting their options if they needed to flee. Zach was acutely aware of this disadvantage, his eyes constantly scanning the rim of the canyon above them. "We're about a mile from where the canyon opens up," he told Zara quietly. "Once we're through, it's only another half-hour to town." She nodded, taking comfort in his calm confidence. They continued in silence, the only sounds the gentle burble of the stream and Scout's hooves on the rocky ground. They had almost reached the end of the canyon when the crack of a rifle shot echoed off the stone walls. Scout reared in alarm as dust kicked up from the ground where the bullet struck, inches from the horse's front hooves. "Hang on," Zach shouted, spurring Scout into a gallop. He leaned forward, pressing Zara low against the horse's neck, his body sheltering hers as best he could. More shots rang out behind them, but they were already moving fast, Scout responding to his rider's urgency with powerful strides. They burst from the canyon into open country, but instead of continuing toward town, Zach veered sharply to the right, heading for a dense thicket of oaks and underbrush. "They'll be expecting us to make for San Bernardino," he explained as they plunged into the cover of the trees. "We need to circle around, approach from another direction." Zara clung to the saddle horn, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Zach must feel it through her back. The men had found them. Somehow they had known which way they would come, had set up an ambush. The implications were terrifying. Zach guided Scout deeper into the woods, following what appeared to be game trails. He finally slowed their pace, allowing the winded horse to catch its breath. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes," Zara managed, though she was trembling with adrenaline and fear. "How did they find us?" "Don't know," Zach admitted, his tone grim. "But they're determined, I'll give them that." He dismounted, helping Zara down before leading Scout to a small clearing where the horse could graze. Keeping low, he moved to the edge of the thicket, scanning the landscape they had just traversed. "I don't see them," he said after a moment. "But they'll be searching. We need to keep moving, but Scout needs a rest first." Zara nodded, leaning against a tree trunk for support as the fear and exertion caught up with her. Zach noticed her pallor and moved to her side, concern evident in his eyes. "Here," he said, reaching into his saddlebag and pulling out a canteen. "Drink some water." She accepted gratefully, taking several long swallows before handing it back. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and despite the danger, Zara felt a small jolt at the contact. "Why are they so determined to find me?" she whispered. "Surely there have been other witnesses to their crimes." Zach's expression darkened. "I've been thinking about that. A regular stagecoach robbery wouldn't warrant this kind of pursuit. They must have been carrying something valuable, something they don't want authorities to know about." "The strongbox," Zara said suddenly, remembering. "Before I ran, I saw them open the strongbox. They seemed excited about whatever was inside, more than you'd expect for regular mail or money." Zach considered this new information. Could be gold shipments or maybe something else entirely. Whatever it is, they're willing to kill to keep it secret. They fell silent, each lost in thought. After allowing Scout about 20 minutes to rest, Zach checked their surroundings once more before determining it was safe to continue. "We'll head southeast for a while, then circle back toward town," he explained as he helped Zara back onto Scout. "It'll take longer, but with luck, we'll avoid running into them again." The remainder of their journey was tense but uneventful. Zach kept them to covered routes whenever possible, avoiding open ground and staying alert for any sign of pursuit. By the time the buildings of San Bernardino came into view, The sun was high overhead, indicating they had been traveling for nearly 4 hours. The town was larger than Zara had expected, with several streets of substantial buildings radiating out from a central square. Dust rose from the main thoroughfare as wagons and riders moved about their business. After the isolation of the forest and the fear of pursuit, the sight of civilization was immensely relieving. Zach guided Scout directly to a sturdy brick building with San Bernardino County Sheriff painted on a wooden sign outside. He dismounted first, then lifted Zara down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "You ready for this?" he asked, his green hazel eyes searching hers. Zara took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, it's time these men were brought to justice. Inside, they found a grizzled man in his 50s seated behind a desk, his weathered face breaking into surprise when they entered. "Well, Zach Morgan," he said, standing to greet them. "Twice in 1 month must be some kind of record for you coming to town." "Sheriff Davis," Zach acknowledged with a nod. "This is Miss Zara Whitfield. She was on the stagecoach that was due in yesterday." The sheriff's expression immediately turned serious. "The stage never arrived," he confirmed. "Got a telegram from the way station at Miller's Crossing saying it was overdue. Sent a couple of deputies out along the route this morning." "It was robbed," Zara said, stepping forward. "About 5 miles out of town. The driver and guard were killed, the other passengers." She hesitated, the memory painful. "I don't know what happened to them. I managed to escape into the woods." Sheriff Davis gestured for them to sit, his face grim. "Tell me everything, Miss Whitfield. Leave nothing out." For the next hour, Zara recounted the entire ordeal: the attack on the stagecoach, her escape into the forest, the chase, and finally Zach's timely intervention. She described the 5 men as best she could, particularly noting the leader with the scar on his cheek. The sheriff listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on a pad of paper. When she mentioned the strongbox and the outlaw's unusual interest in its contents, he frowned deeply. "There wasn't supposed to be anything special on that stage," he said, more to himself than to them. "Regular mail passenger fares, nothing worth killing over." "Something was in that box they didn't want reported," Zach insisted. "They followed us all the way to the canyon east of town, set up an ambush." Sheriff Davis's bushy eyebrows shot up in alarm. "They ambushed you today." "Took shots at us," Zach confirmed. "We managed to lose them, came in the back way." The sheriff stood, moving to a gun rack on the wall and removing a shotgun. "I'll get a posse together, head out to the stagecoach route. If those boys are still in the area, we'll find them." He turned to Zara. "Miss Whitfield, you're a key witness. I'd feel better if you stayed somewhere secure until we get this sorted out." "She can stay with me," Zach said, the words coming out before he'd fully considered them. Both Zara and the sheriff looked at him in surprise. "That is," Zach continued, feeling suddenly awkward, "my place is isolated, hard to approach without being seen, and I can keep her safe." Sheriff Davis studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Might be the best option, at least until we catch these fellas. What do you say, Miss Whitfield?" Zara glanced between the 2 men, a slight flush rising to her cheeks. The idea of continuing to stay at Zach's cabin was both alarming and oddly appealing. It was highly improper, of course, but given the circumstances. "If Mr. Morgan doesn't mind," she said carefully, "I would feel safer there than in town." "Then it's settled," the sheriff declared. "Zach, get her back to your place. I'll send word when we've made progress." He hesitated, then added, "Be careful. These don't sound like men who give up easily." They left the sheriff's office, stepping back into the bright sunlight of the town square. Zach led Zara across the street to a general store. "We should get you some supplies if you're going to be staying longer," he explained as they entered the shop. "And proper clothes for riding." The store was crowded with goods of all descriptions, shelves stacked with canned foods and dry goods, barrels of flour and sugar, tools hanging from the walls, and a selection of ready-made clothing at the back. The shopkeeper, a friendly woman in her 40s, hurried forward to greet them. "Zachary Morgan, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in months, Mrs. Peterson." Zach nodded, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. "This is Miss Whitfield. She needs some essentials, riding clothes, a few dresses if you've got them ready-made, personal items. Mrs." Peterson's eyes lit up with interest as she took in Zara's appearance, the torn dress, Zach's shirt, and the general dishevelment that spoke of a difficult journey. Of course, she said, taking Zara's arm and leading her toward the back of the store. "Let's see what we can find for you, dear." Zach hung back, examining some ammunition, while the women disappeared behind a curtain that separated the clothing section from the rest of the store. He could hear their voices, Mrs. Peterson's animated chatter and Zara's more reserved responses, but couldn't make out the words. When they emerged some time later, Zara was carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper, and Mrs. Peterson was beaming triumphantly. "All set," the shopkeeper announced. "Got her everything a lady might need for a stay in the country." "Put it on your account, Zach, please," he agreed, reaching for his wallet to pay for the ammunition he'd selected. Outside, Zara turned to him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "You shouldn't have paid for all that," she said. "I have money, or I did, before the robbery." "Consider it a loan," Zach replied easily. "You can pay me back when things are settled." They made one more stop at a restaurant where Zach insisted they eat a proper meal before the journey back to his cabin. The simple fare, beef stew and fresh bread, was delicious after their morning's adventure. As they ate, Zach found himself watching Zara more than he intended. Even in her disheveled state, there was something compelling about her, a quiet dignity, a resilience that impressed him. She caught him looking once and held his gaze for a moment before both of them glanced away, suddenly self-conscious. By the time they set out from town, the afternoon was well advanced. Zach was careful to take a different route than their approach, keeping to more open ground where they could see potential threats from a distance. Scout carried both of them plus Zara's purchases without complaint, though Zach was conscious of the extra burden on the horse. "We'll take it easy," he told Zara as they left the town behind. "Should make it back before dark if we don't run into any trouble." Zara nodded, more comfortable now in her position in front of him on the horse. "Do you think the sheriff will find them?" "Davis is good at his job," Zach replied. "If they're still in the area, he's got a decent chance." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of Scout's gait lulling them both into a contemplative mood. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. "Can I ask you something?" Zara said suddenly. "Sure," Zach responded, curious. "Why do you live out here alone? You seem like someone who could have succeeded anywhere." The question caught him off guard, and he took his time formulating an answer. "After the war," he began slowly, "I couldn't settle back into normal life. Too many memories, too much noise in my head. Out here with just the land and the horses for company, things got quieter, I could breathe again." Zara considered this, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You found peace." "Something like that," he agreed. "What about you?" "You mentioned heading to San Francisco to stay with your aunt, but is that what you really want?" It was Zara's turn to be thoughtful. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "After my parents died, staying in St. Louis felt suffocating. Everyone knew me as poor Miss Whitfield, the orphan. I thought a fresh start would help me figure out who I am now, what I want from life." "And have you figured it out, I mean?" She laughed softly, the sound unexpectedly melodic. "Not even close, but perhaps that's the point of the journey." As they talked, the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. They were about a mile from Zach's cabin when Scout suddenly stopped, ears pricking forward alertly. Zach immediately tensed, his hand moving to his revolver. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, scanning their surroundings. For several long moments they sat perfectly still, listening. The evening was quiet except for the usual sounds of nature, birds settling for the night, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Then Zach saw a thin column of smoke rising from the direction of his cabin. "Someone's at my place," he said grimly. Zara gasped softly. "The outlaws?" "Maybe." His mind raced through the possibilities. "Or it could be Sheriff Davis or one of his deputies. Either way, we're not riding straight in." He guided Scout off the trail into a stand of trees, dismounting and helping Zara down as well. "Stay here with Scout," he instructed, drawing his revolver. "If you hear shooting, take him and ride back toward town. Don't wait for me." "I'm not leaving you," Zara protested, grabbing his arm. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them: concern, determination, and something deeper neither was ready to acknowledge. "I'll be careful," Zach promised. "Just need to see who's there." Reluctantly, Zara released his arm and took Scout's reins. Zach checked his revolver one last time, then moved silently through the trees, using the skills he'd honed during the war to approach his cabin undetected. As he drew closer, he could see that the smoke was coming from his chimney. Someone had lit a fire. From his vantage point at the edge of the clearing, he could see two horses hitched outside, neither of which he recognized. Keeping to the cover of the trees, he circled the property, trying to get a better view of whoever was inside. Through a window, he caught a glimpse of movement, a man's figure passing by the glass. Zach weighed his options. He could return to Zara, and they could both retreat to town, but that would mean leaving his home in the hands of potential outlaws. Or he could try to get closer, maybe even reclaim his cabin if it was only two men. His decision was made for him when the cabin door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. Even in the fading light, Zach could make out the scar that ran down the left side of his face, the outlaw leader. Zach retreated silently back to where Zara waited with Scout. Her face showed immediate relief when she saw him, quickly followed by concern as she read his expression. "They're there," she whispered, "the outlaws." "At least two of them," Zach confirmed, "the leader and one other. Don't know about the rest." "What do we do?" Zach considered their limited options. "It'll be dark soon. Too dangerous to head back to town in the dark with them possibly between us and there. We'll have to make camp, wait till morning." "Camp?" Zara repeated, looking around at the wilderness with apprehension. "I know a place," Zach assured her. "A line shack about 2 miles from here. It's basic, but it's shelter." They mounted Scout once more, and Zach guided them deeper into the forest, away from the trail and his occupied cabin. The light was fading rapidly now, making the journey slow and careful. Zara clung to the saddle horn, hyper-aware of every sound in the darkening woods. Finally, they reached a small clearing where a crude one-room structure stood, little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a single window and door. It was dusty and clearly had not been used for some time, but it was solid. "Used this place when I was first building the cabin," Zach explained as he helped Zara dismount. "Keep some emergency supplies here." He led Scout to a small lean-to attached to the side of the shack, unsaddling him and providing water from a nearby stream. Inside the shack, he found a lantern and matches, illuminating the sparse interior: a small cast iron stove, a narrow cot, a rough-hewn table, and a single chair. "It's not much," he said apologetically. "It's perfect," Zara replied sincerely, setting down her bundle of new clothes. Zach got a fire going in the small stove, the warmth slowly spreading through the chilly interior. From a storage trunk, he produced some canned beans and dried beef emergency rations he kept stocked. "Not exactly what Mrs. Peterson serves at her restaurant," he said as he prepared the simple meal. Zara smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, lighting up her eyes and revealing a small dimple in her right cheek. "Zach found himself momentarily transfixed. After everything that's happened," she said, "food and shelter feel like luxuries beyond measure." They ate their humble dinner in companionable silence, the stress of the day catching up with both of them. When they had finished, an awkward moment arrived as they both glanced at the single cot. "You take the bed," Zach said immediately. "I'll sleep on the floor." "You've done so much already," Zara protested. "I can't take your bed again." "Please," he insisted. "My mother raised me better than to let a lady sleep on the floor." His mention of his mother sparked Zara's curiosity. "You never talk about your family," she observed. Zach shrugged, spreading his bedroll on the floor near the stove. "Not much to tell. Parents had a small farm in Kentucky. Father died when I was 16. Mother passed while I was at war. No siblings." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly. He nodded in acknowledgement. "What about your family?" Zara sat on the edge of the cot, her hands folded in her lap. My father was a banker in St. Louis. Mother came from an old Virginia family that lost everything in the war. I had a brother, but he died of scarlet fever when he was 10. I was 8 at the time. That's tough, Zach said, genuine sympathy in his voice. It was, she agreed. After that, my parents became protective. They meant well, but it sometimes felt like they were keeping me in a glass case, afraid to let me experience anything that might bring pain. And now here you are, having the adventure of a lifetime, Zach observed with a touch of dry humor. Despite herself, Zara laughed. Not exactly the adventure I had in mind when I boarded that stagecoach. Their eyes met across the small room, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. For a moment, neither spoke, caught in the unexpected connection. Zach was the first to break the silence, clearing his throat and turning to add another log to the stove. We should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll need to figure out our next move. Zara nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. She reached for her bundle of purchases from Mrs. Peterson, extracting a simple nightgown. Zach immediately stood. I'll check on Scout, he said, heading for the door to give her privacy. When he returned some minutes later, Zara was already under the thin blanket on the cot, her clothes neatly folded on the chair. The lamplight cast a soft glow over her features, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Zach moved quietly to his bedroll, removing only his boots before lying down fully clothed, his revolver within easy reach. Zach, Zara's voice came softly through the dim light. Yes, thank you. For everything, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did. There was a pause before he replied. Try to get some sleep, Zara. Tomorrow will be a long day. As the night deepened around the small shack, both of them lay awake, aware of the other's presence just a few feet away, and of the uncertain future that awaited them with the dawn. Morning arrived with a gentle rain pattering on the roof of the lined shack. Zach woke first, his body accustomed to rising with the sun despite the poor sleep he'd gotten on the hard floor. He sat up slowly, muscles protesting, and glanced toward the cot. Zara was still asleep, her face peaceful in repose, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. She looked younger in sleep, the worry lines that had marked her brow these past 2 days smoothed away. Zach found himself watching her longer than he should, mesmerized by the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Shaking himself from his reverie, he rose quietly and rekindled the fire in the stove. The soft sounds of his movement eventually roused Zara, who blinked awake with momentary confusion before her surroundings registered. Good morning, she murmured, sitting up and drawing the blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. Morning, Zach replied, keeping his eyes averted to give her privacy. Rain's set in. Might have to wait it out before we move, Zara nodded, gathering her clothes. I'll just get dressed. I'll check on Scout, Zach said, heading outside despite the rain. The gentle shower had transformed the forest, bringing out rich scents of pine and damp earth. Scout nickered a greeting as Zach approached the lean-to, seemingly content with his shelter from the weather. What do you think, boy? Zach murmured, stroking the horse's neck. Those men are probably still at my cabin. Sheriff might be looking for us, and here we are, stuck in the middle. Scout merely continued munching on the feed Zach had provided, unconcerned with human complications. When Zach returned to the shack, Zara was dressed in her new clothes, a practical riding skirt and blouse that Mrs. Peterson had provided. Her hair was neatly braided, and she had managed to wash her face with some of the rainwater Zach had collected in a bucket outside. What's our plan? She asked as they shared a meager breakfast of the remaining dried beef. Zach considered their options. The rain's keeping us put for now. Even if it clears, we can't go back to my place with those men there, and I don't like the idea of traveling all the way to town with you still being hunted. So we wait. Zara didn't sound pleased with the prospect. For now, Zach agreed. Sheriff Davis knows roughly where to look for us. He might send someone this way once they've checked the stagecoach site. The day stretched before them, confined to the tiny shack by the steady rain. After breakfast, Zach produced a deck of cards from his saddlebag, and they passed some time playing simple games. The close quarters made them increasingly aware of each other, the accidental brush of fingers as cards were exchanged. The way Zara tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she concentrated. The rare but transformative smile that appeared on Zach's face when he won a hand. As the morning wore on, their conversation deepened beyond the immediate concerns of their predicament. "What was it like?" Zara asked as she shuffled the cards. "The war, I mean, if you don't mind talking about it." Zach was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low, mostly boring, long stretches of nothing happening followed by moments of sheer terror. The waiting was almost worse than the fighting. "You were in the Union Army," he nodded. 5th Kentucky Cavalry, enlisted in '63 after Gettysburg. "Thought the war would be over soon." A humorless smile crossed his lips. "Was wrong about that." "Were you at Appomattox?" Zara asked hesitantly, remembering his earlier mention of coming west after Lee's surrender. "No, my unit was farther south by then. We got word of the surrender while pursuing Johnston's forces in North Carolina." He paused, his expression distant. "Strangest feeling, hearing it was over, like waking from a long nightmare, except the memories don't fade." Zara reached across the small table, placing her hand gently on his. "I can't imagine what that was like." Zach glanced down at their hands, then back to her face, his expression softening. "What about you? What was St. Louis like during the war?" "Divided," Zara replied, withdrawing her hand slowly. "Missouri stayed in the Union, but many in St. Louis had Southern sympathies, including some in my mother's family. There were neighbors who stopped speaking to each other, friends who became enemies overnight. War has a way of doing that," Zach observed, "tearing things apart." "Yes," she agreed quietly. "But eventually things get rebuilt, don't they? Different, perhaps, but whole again." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of loss and the tentative hope of renewal. The moment was broken by the sound of hoofbeats approaching the shack. Instantly alert, Zach reached for his revolver, motioning for Zara to move away from the window. "Stay back," he whispered, moving cautiously to peer through the small glass pane. Through the rain, he could make out 3 riders approaching the clearing. As they drew closer, relief washed over him as he recognized Sheriff Davis's distinctive figure leading the group. "It's the sheriff," he told Zara, holstering his weapon. They stepped onto the small porch as the lawmen dismounted, their slickers glistening with rainwater. "Morgan," Sheriff Davis greeted him with a nod. "Miss Whitfield, good to see you both in one piece." "Sheriff," Zach acknowledged. "Any news?" Davis removed his hat, shaking off the water before answering. "Found the stagecoach just where Miss Whitfield described. Driver and guard dead," as she said. 3 passengers, 2 a drummer from Chicago, an elderly couple heading to visit family. Zara paled at the news, grief washing over her for the innocent lives lost. Zach moved slightly closer to her, offering silent support. "What about the outlaws?" he asked. "No sign at the scene," Davis replied, "but we know they're in the area. Stopped by your place, Morgan. Saw signs someone had been there, but they were gone by the time we arrived." Zach frowned. "They were there yesterday evening. We saw the smoke from the chimney." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Looks like they left in a hurry, food still on the table. My guess is they spotted my posse in the area and cleared out." "Any idea what they were after?" Zara asked. "Why they'd go to so much trouble to find me?" Davis exchanged a look with one of his deputies before answering. "We telegraphed the stage company about the contents of that strongbox. Turns out it was carrying something special, government bonds being transferred to a bank in San Francisco, worth about $50,000. Zach whistled softly. "That's a fortune." "Enough to kill for, apparently," the sheriff agreed. "But here's the interesting part. According to the manifest, there were supposed to be 5 men on that stage. We only found 3 bodies." Zara frowned. "I only remember 4 of us passengers, the drummer, the elderly couple, and myself." "The 5th would have been a government agent escorting the bonds," Davis explained. "No sign of him at the wreck." "So either he escaped like Miss Whitfield did," Zach reasoned, or he was in on it," the sheriff finished, "working with the outlaws." The implications hung heavily in the air. If one of the gang was a government agent or posing as one, they had connections that made them even more dangerous. "What now?" Zara asked, wrapping her arms around herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "We've got men searching the area," Davis replied, "but they could be anywhere by now. Miss Whitfield, you're still our best witness. I need you to come back to town with us where we can protect you properly." Zach started to protest, then caught himself. It was the sensible course of action. In town, surrounded by the sheriff's men, Zara would be safer than out here with just him for protection. Still, the thought of her leaving brought an unexpected pang. "What about my place?" he asked instead. "Appears they didn't do much damage," Davis assured him. "Might want to stay in town yourself for a few days, just to be safe." Zach nodded reluctantly. "Let me get our things." Inside the shack, he gathered their few possessions while Zara changed into her riding clothes. They moved efficiently, not speaking of the imminent separation, though both felt its weight when they emerged. The rain had eased to a light drizzle. One of the deputies offered his horse to Zara, but Zach intervened. "She can ride with me," he said. "Scout's used to her." If the sheriff thought this arrangement unusual, he didn't comment. The group mounted up and began the journey toward San Bernardino, the lawmen alert for any sign of the outlaws. Zara sat in front of Zach as before, his arms around her as he held the reins. She leaned back slightly, taking comfort in his solid presence. "I'll miss this," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "As terrifying as it's been, there's something about being out here that feels real." "You could stay," Zach replied, the words escaping before he could consider them. "In San Bernardino, I mean, at least until they catch these men." Zara turned slightly, looking up at him with surprise. "What about my aunt in San Francisco?" "You could telegraph her, explain the situation." He hesitated, then added, "The town could use a schoolteacher. The last one left months ago to get married." "A schoolteacher," Zara repeated, considering the idea. She had assisted at her church's school in St. Louis, had even considered teaching as a profession before her parents' deaths disrupted her plans. "Do you think they would hire me?" "With your education, in a heartbeat." There was something in his voice, a hope he couldn't quite disguise. She smiled, turning back around. "Perhaps I will inquire about the position." The rest of the journey passed in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of what might be. When they reached town, Sheriff Davis led them directly to the hotel, a modest two-story building on the main street. "I've arranged rooms for both of you," he explained. "Deputies will be posted in the lobby and outside. Should be safe enough." Zach nodded his thanks, helping Zara dismount before passing Scout's reins to a stable boy who appeared at his side. Inside the hotel, the sheriff spoke briefly with the proprietor, a round-faced man with a neat mustache, who led them upstairs to adjacent rooms. "Dinner's served in the dining room from 6 to 8, the man informed them. "Bath can be arranged if you'd like." "Thank you," Zara replied, the prospect of a proper bath after days of hardship almost overwhelming. Left alone in her room, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly at a loss. After the constant fear and movement of the past days, the quiet safety of the hotel room felt almost unreal. She found herself listening for Zach's movements in the next room, taking comfort in knowing he was close by. A knock at her door startled her. Opening it cautiously, she found a maid with hot water and towels for a bath. Soon, a copper tub was set up behind a screen, filled with steaming water scented lightly with lavender. The luxury of sinking into the hot bath was almost enough to bring tears to Zara's eyes. She washed away the grime and fear of the past days, allowing herself to relax for the first time since the stagecoach attack. As she soaked, her thoughts turned inevitably to Zachary Morgan. He was unlike any man she had known in St. Louis, straightforward and genuine, without the polished manners, but also without the pretense of the gentleman she had grown up around. His quiet strength and unfailing decency had become a lifeline in this strange new world. And now, the idea of staying in San Bernardino, of seeing him again beyond this crisis, had taken root in her mind. It was foolish, perhaps they barely knew each other, and under extraordinary circumstances at that. Yet something about him called to her in a way she couldn't ignore. After her bath, Zara dressed in one of the simple but attractive dresses Mrs. Peterson had provided. It fit well enough, though clearly not tailored to her specifically. She arranged her hair as best she could without her usual implements, then steeled herself to venture downstairs for dinner. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Zach, who was just exiting his own room. He too had bathed and changed, wearing a clean shirt and his least worn pair of trousers. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at the edges. "Oh," Zara exclaimed, taking a step back. "I was just heading down to dinner." "I was hoping to escort you," Zach replied, a touch of awkwardness in his usually confident demeanor. "If you'd like," Zara smiled, finding his discomfort endearing. "I would like that very much, Mr. Morgan." He offered his arm and she took it, feeling a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact. Together they descended the stairs to the hotel's small dining room where several other guests were already seated. Their dinner was simple but delicious roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables, followed by apple pie. The normalcy of the meal, of sitting across from each other at a proper table with clean dishes and tablecloths, felt almost surreal after their wilderness adventure. "I spoke with Sheriff Davis while you were resting," Zach mentioned as they ate. "He's posted an extra deputy outside our rooms tonight, says he's organizing a larger posse tomorrow to sweep the surrounding area." "Do you think they'll find the outlaws?" Zara asked. Zach considered this. "Maybe. They've got a good head start, though, and lots of places to hide in these hills." "I should feel relieved to be safe," Zara admitted, setting down her fork. "But I can't help thinking about those poor people on the stagecoach. They didn't deserve what happened to them." "No, they didn't," Zach agreed solemnly. "But it wasn't your fault, Zara. You survived. There's no shame in that." She met his gaze, finding comfort in his understanding. "I've been thinking about what you said about staying in San Bernardino. I think I'd like to inquire about the teaching position." Something flickered in Zach's eyes, pleasure, perhaps, or relief. "Mayor's office would be the place to start. I could take you there tomorrow if you'd like." "I would," Zara replied, a small smile playing at her lips. "Though I'm not sure how qualified I am." "You're educated, well-spoken," Zach pointed out, "and brave as hell. Sorry as anything. The children of San Bernardino would be lucky to have you." His obvious faith in her abilities warmed Zara's heart. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, Zach. Not just for saving my life, but for seeing me. The real me, not just the proper young lady from St. Louis." Zach's expression softened, a rare, full smile transforming his features. "The real you is pretty impressive, Zara Whitfield." They finished their meal in companionable silence, both aware of a shift in their relationship from strangers thrown together by circumstance to something deeper, though neither was quite ready to name it. As they climbed the stairs back to their rooms, Zach paused outside Zara's door. "I'll be right next door if you need anything," he said, "and there's a deputy at the end of the hall." "I feel quite safe," Zara assured him, though in truth, it was his presence more than the deputies that brought her comfort. For a moment, they stood facing each other, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Impulsively, Zara rose on her toes and placed a gentle kiss on Zach's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, then quickly entered her room, closing the door behind her. In the hallway, Zach stood motionless, his hand rising to touch the spot where her lips had been. A slow smile spread across his face as he turned toward his own room, his step lighter than it had been in years. Inside her room, Zara leaned against the door, her heart racing. The simple gesture had felt both daring and right, a small acknowledgement of the connection growing between them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since the stagecoach attack, she found herself looking forward to the future with hope rather than fear. As she prepared for bed, drawing the curtains against the night, Zara glanced once more at the wall she shared with Zach's room. "Good night," she whispered, though he couldn't possibly hear. In his own room, as if in response to her unspoken farewell, Zach looked toward the same wall and murmured, "Sleep well, Zara." Neither knew that their peace was temporary, or that the danger they thought they had escaped was closer than they realized. Dawn broke clear and bright over San Bernardino, the previous day's rain leaving everything washed clean and glistening. Zara woke early, feeling remarkably refreshed after her first night in a real bed since the stagecoach attack. She dressed in her new clothes, grateful for Mrs. Peterson's practical selections, and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. A soft knock at her door announced breakfast, a tray brought by a hotel made with coffee, eggs, and toast. As Zara ate by the window, watching the town come to life below, another knock came. This one she recognized immediately as Zach's firm, but not demanding. Opening the door, she found him standing in the hallway, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. The transformation from rugged frontiersman to something approaching a town gentleman was subtle but noticeable. "Good morning," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "Sheriff Davis would like to speak with us downstairs when you're ready." "I've just finished breakfast," Zara replied, gesturing to the tray. "I'll be right down." In the hotel lobby, they found Sheriff Davis in conversation with two of his deputies. The lawman looked tired, suggesting he had been up for much of the night. "Miss Whitfield, Morgan," he greeted them. "Hope you both slept well." "Very well, thank you," Zara confirmed. "Any news of the outlaws?" Davis shook his head grimly. "Nothing solid. Found some tracks heading east into the mountains, but lost them on rocky ground. They know this territory." "What happens now?" Zach asked. "I've sent telegrams to neighboring counties with descriptions of the men," Davis explained. "Also contacted the Treasury Department about those missing bonds. They're sending an agent from Los Angeles, should be here by tomorrow." "And Miss Whitfield?" Zach pressed. "She's still in danger as long as these men are free," the sheriff nodded. "True enough. I'll keep deputies watching the hotel, but I can't spare men indefinitely." He turned to Zara. "Do you still plan to continue to San Francisco, Miss?" Zara glanced at Zach before answering. "Actually, I was hoping to inquire about staying in San Bernardino." "I understand the town is in need of a teacher." Davis's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "That we are. Last schoolmarm left us 3 months ago. You interested in the position?" "I would like to apply, yes," Zara confirmed. "I assisted with teaching at my church in St. Louis for several years." "Well, that's Mayor Harrington's department," Davis said. "His office is just down the street. I'd be happy to introduce you." "I offered to take her," Zach interjected. The sheriff nodded, a knowing look passing briefly across his weathered face. "Fine by me. Just stay in town for now, both of you. Safer that way." After the sheriff departed to continue his investigation, Zach and Zara stepped out into the bright morning sunshine. The main street of San Bernardino bustled with activity wagons delivering goods, shopkeepers opening their establishments, townspeople going about their daily business. "It's quite a charming town," Zara observed as they walked toward the mayor's office. "It's growing," Zach agreed. "When I first came through 5 years ago, it was half this size. The railroads made a difference." As they passed the general store, Mrs. Peterson spotted them through the window and hurried outside. "Miss Whitfield, Mr. Morgan," she called. "I've been so worried. Sheriff told me about your ordeal. Are you both all right?" "We're fine, Mrs. Peterson," Zara assured her with a smile. "Thanks in large part to your excellent provisions." The shopkeeper beamed at the compliment. "Do you need anything else, dear?" "I've just received some lovely fabric that would make a beautiful dress." "Perhaps later," Zara replied. "We're on our way to see the mayor about the teaching position." Mrs. Peterson's eyes lit up with excitement. "Oh, are you applying? That would be wonderful. We've had the children studying with Reverend Simmons, but the poor man can barely keep up with his regular duties." "I don't know if I'll be selected," Zara cautioned, "but I would like to try." "With your education, you're perfect for it, Mrs. Peterson declared, unconsciously echoing Zach's earlier assessment. "Come see me after you speak with the mayor. I'll put together some things you might need." They continued on to the mayor's office, a modest brick building next to the courthouse. Inside, a clerk directed them to Mayor Harrington's door, which stood open. The mayor was a portly man in his 50s with an impressive mustache and friendly eyes. He rose from his desk as they entered, extending his hand first to Zach, then to Zara. "Mr. Morgan, a pleasure. Don't often see you in town twice in 1 week." His gaze shifted to Zara. "And you must be Miss Whitfield. Sheriff Davis mentioned you might be stopping by. Terrible business with the stagecoach, simply terrible." "Thank you for seeing us, Mayor," Zara replied. "Please sit down," Harrington gestured to the chairs facing his desk. "Now, I understand you're interested in our teaching position." For the next half hour, Zara outlined her educational background and teaching experience. The mayor listened attentively, occasionally asking questions about her methods and philosophy of education. 23 children currently enrolled, he explained. Ages 6 to 16. One-room schoolhouse just at the edge of town. Pay is $40 a month with lodging provided in a small house behind the school. "That sounds quite suitable," Zara said, her excitement growing at the prospect. "Term starts in 2 weeks," Harrington continued. "Would give you time to settle in, prepare your lessons." "If I were selected," Zara added cautiously, the mayor chuckled. "Miss Whitfield, you're the first qualified applicant we've had in months. The position is yours if you want it." Zara's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I would be honored to accept, Mayor Harrington." "Excellent," he declared, standing to shake her hand once more. "I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. You can move into the teacher's house as soon as you're ready." As they left the mayor's office, Zara could barely contain her excitement. "I can't believe it happened so easily," she exclaimed once they were outside. "I have a position, a place to live, a new beginning." Zach smiled, her enthusiasm infectious. "Told you they'd snatch you up. The town's lucky to have you." They walked along the boardwalk, discussing the possibilities of her new role. When they passed a cafe, Zach suggested they stop for coffee to celebrate her success. Inside, they found a cozy table by the window. The establishment was quiet at mid-morning, with only a few other patrons scattered about. They ordered coffee and slices of freshly baked pie. "I should write to my aunt in San Francisco," Zara mused as they waited for their order. "Let her know I won't be coming after all." "Do you think she'll be disappointed?" Zach asked. Zara considered this. "Perhaps a little, but she'll understand. Aunt Margaret has always encouraged me to follow my own path." She paused, then added softly, "Something my parents never quite managed. They wanted to protect you," Zach observed. "Yes, but sometimes protection becomes a cage." She met his eyes across the table. "Out here, despite all the danger, I've felt more alive in the past few days than I have in years." Their coffee arrived, interrupting the moment. As they sipped the hot, strong brew, Zara noticed Zach's attention shift to something outside the window. His expression changed subtly, his body tensing. "What is it?" she asked, alarmed by his sudden alertness. "Don't turn around," he said quietly, his hand moving casually toward his holstered revolver. Man across the street by the livery, tall with a scar down his left cheek. Zara's breath caught in her throat. "The outlaw leader looks like him," Zach confirmed, his voice low and controlled. "He's watching the hotel, doesn't know we're here." Fear washed over Zara, followed immediately by determination. "We need to alert Sheriff Davis." "His office is 2 blocks away," Zach said, calculating. "If we leave now, we risk being spotted." As they debated their options, the bell over the cafe door jingled. Zach's eyes widened slightly as he glanced at the newcomer, his hand now resting directly on his revolver. "Afternoon, folks," a smooth voice said from behind Zara. "Mind if I join you?" She turned slowly to find a well-dressed man in his 30s standing beside their table. He was handsome in a polished way, with neatly trimmed dark hair and a practiced smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "I don't believe we've been introduced," the man continued, pulling out a chair without waiting for an invitation. "Thomas Blackwell at your service." "We're just leaving," Zach said tersely, rising from his seat. Blackwell's smile never faltered, but his right hand moved beneath his coat. "I'm afraid I must insist on your company a while longer, Mr. Morgan, you and the lovely Miss Whitfield." Zara's blood ran cold as she realized the implication. This man knew their names. He was with the outlaws. "The man outside is my associate, Mr. Reed," Blackwell confirmed, noticing her expression. "He's very eager to renew your acquaintance." "What do you want?" Zach demanded, his voice low enough not to attract the attention of the other patrons. "Just a conversation," Blackwell replied smoothly. About what Miss Whitfield saw and what she's told the authorities. Zara straightened in her chair, refusing to be intimidated despite her racing heart. I've told them everything about the robbery, the murders, and the government bonds you stole. A flicker of surprise crossed Blackwell's face before his composure returned. Observant, aren't you? That complicates matters. He gestured subtly with his concealed hand. Now, we're going to walk out of here calmly. My carriage is waiting behind the cafe. If either of you makes a scene, people will die, starting with that nice family with the small children 3 tables over. Zach's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the family Blackwell had indicated. A young couple with 2 small children, completely unaware of the danger. Fine, he conceded, helping Zara to her feet. But if you harm her, that depends entirely on your cooperation, Mr. Morgan. Blackwell cut him off, standing as well. After you. With Blackwell close behind them, they moved toward the rear exit of the cafe. Zara's mind raced, looking for any opportunity to signal for help, but the outlaw kept close, his hand never straying far from his concealed weapon. Behind the cafe, as promised, a closed carriage waited, its driver a burly man with a shotgun resting across his lap. The scarred man Reed appeared from around the corner, his expression darkening with satisfaction when he saw Zara. Well, well, he drawled. The lady who got away, not this time. Inside, Blackwell ordered, opening the carriage door. Both of you. Zach moved protectively closer to Zara as they were forced into the carriage. Reed climbed in after them, his revolver drawn and pointed directly at Zach's chest. Blackwell took the seat opposite, still maintaining his facade of civilized behavior despite the circumstances. The driver set the horses in motion, and the carriage lurched forward, heading away from the center of town. "Where are you taking us?" Zara demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Somewhere we can have a private conversation," Blackwell replied. "About those bonds and your unfortunate tendency to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." "You won't get away with this," Zach stated flatly. "Sheriff Davis knows who you are, what you've done." Reed laughed, the sound harsh in the confined space. "Sheriff's halfway to Miller's Crossing with his posse, following a false trail we left. By the time he gets back, we'll be long gone." Zara's eyes met Zach's across the carriage, a silent message passing between them. They would have to create their own opportunity for escape. No help would be coming. The carriage continued out of town, following a rutted road into the hills. After about 20 minutes, it turned onto a narrow track that wound through dense trees, eventually stopping before a small, dilapidated cabin. "Our temporary accommodations," Blackwell announced as Reed herded them out of the carriage at gunpoint. "Not as comfortable as the hotel, I'm afraid, but it will serve our purpose." Inside, the cabin was Spartan, a rough table with 4 chairs, a cold fireplace, and little else. 2 more men were waiting, both armed, bringing their captors to a total of 5, the entire gang from the stagecoach robbery. "Sit," Reed ordered, shoving Zach toward one of the chairs. "Hands where I can see them." As they complied, Blackwell removed his coat and hung it carefully on a peg by the door, revealing an expensive waistcoat and the holstered revolver he had kept concealed. "Now then," he said, pulling up a chair facing them, "let's discuss our situation like reasonable people." "There's nothing reasonable about kidnapping and murder," Zara replied, anger temporarily overcoming her fear. Blackwell's expression hardened slightly. "The stagecoach was unfortunate. Those deaths weren't planned, but when the guard recognized me despite my disguise, we had to adapt." "You were posing as the Treasury agent," Zach realized aloud. "Very good, Mr. Morgan," Blackwell confirmed with a cold smile. "The real agent never made it onto that stage." The bonds were being transferred to San Francisco, $50,000 in government securities, easily convertible with the right connections. "And now you need to eliminate the witnesses," Zara concluded grimly. A crude way of putting it, but essentially correct. Blackwell leaned forward slightly. "However, I'm not unreasonable. The bonds are safely hidden. My associates and I will be leaving the territory soon. Your continued existence doesn't particularly concern me, provided you give me certain assurances." "What kind of assurances?" Zach asked skeptically. Your word that you'll tell the authorities you were mistaken about my involvement, Blackwell explained. That in the confusion of the robbery, you misidentified me, a simple case of resemblance to the actual culprit who, tragically, you cannot describe in detail. And if we refuse, Zara challenged, Reed stepped forward menacingly, but Blackwell waved him back. Then, regrettably, Sheriff Davis will find 2 more victims of the notorious stagecoach robbers, a sad conclusion to a promising romance. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Zara glanced at Zach, seeing the calculation in his eyes as he assessed their options. How do we know you'll keep your word? He asked finally. You don't, Blackwell admitted, but consider the alternatives. I have no particular desire to add to my list of crimes. It's simply a matter of pragmatism. And the other passengers who died, Zara pressed. What about justice for them? A flash of genuine regret crossed Blackwell's face. Some situations spiral beyond control, Miss Whitfield. I cannot undo what's been done. Before either Zach or Zara could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Reed moved to the window, peering cautiously through the dirty glass. 2 riders, he reported tensely. Coming fast, Blackwell frowned, expecting company. No one knows about this place, one of the other outlaws insisted. Take positions, Blackwell ordered, drawing his revolver. If it's the law, we fight our way out. As the outlaws moved to defensive positions, Zach caught Zara's eye, a silent message passing between them. If shooting started, they would need to take cover immediately. The approaching riders stopped outside the cabin. A voice called out not Sheriff Davis as they had feared, but a man unknown to them. Blackwell, it's Harker, we got trouble. Reed opened the door cautiously, admitting 2 dust-covered men who entered with obvious agitation. Treasury agents, the one called Harker reported breathlessly. Just arrived in San Bernardino, they know about the bonds and they've got descriptions of all of us. Blackwell's composure slipped for the first time, genuine alarm showing in his eyes. How many? 4 that we saw, the second newcomer replied. And they're deputizing townsmen for a search party. Word is they're offering a reward for information. We need to move now, Reed insisted. Get the bonds and head for the border while we still can. Blackwell's mind worked rapidly, reassessing his options. The bonds are secure at the other location. We'll collect them on the way. He turned back to Zach and Zara. It seems our negotiation must be cut short. A pity. You're just going to kill us, Zara stated flatly, meeting his gaze without flinching. I prefer to think of it as eliminating variables, Blackwell replied, his civilized veneer falling away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. Reed, you and Miller take care of them. Make it look like they tried to escape. The rest of you get the horses ready. We leave in 5 minutes. As Blackwell and the others moved toward the door, Reed and the man called Miller remained behind, their expressions suggesting they would enjoy their assigned task. Ladies first. Miller suggested with a cruel smile, raising his revolver toward Zara. In that instant, Zach launched himself from his chair, tackling Miller with enough force to send them both crashing into the wall. The revolver discharged, the bullet splintering the wooden floor. Reed swung his gun toward Zach, but Zara was faster, grabbing the heavy chair she'd been sitting in and smashing it against his back. The outlaw stumbled forward, his shot going wild as Zara scrambled for the fallen revolver. Outside, the commotion brought Blackwell and the others running back toward the cabin. Zach struggled with Miller, their bodies locked in a desperate grapple for control of the gun. Reed, recovering from Zara's attack, lunged for her just as her fingers closed around the revolver. Without hesitation, Zara turned and fired. The shot caught Reed in the shoulder, spinning him backward with a howl of pain. The report of the gun was deafening in the small cabin, momentarily freezing everyone in place. Zach used the distraction to deliver a powerful blow to Miller's jaw, sending the man crumpling to the floor unconscious. He immediately dove for Reed's dropped weapon, coming up with it just as Blackwell appeared in the doorway. Drop it. Zach commanded, his voice deadly calm as he aimed at Blackwell's chest. The outlaw leader assessed the situation with a single glance. Reed wounded, Miller unconscious, and both Zach and Zara armed. His own men were behind him, but any attempt to rush the cabin would result in certain death for the first through the door. It seems the variables have shifted, Blackwell observed with grudging respect. What now, Mr. Morgan? Now we wait for the law to arrive, Zach replied steadily. Drop your weapons, all of you. A tense standoff ensued, neither side willing to yield. Zara moved to Zach's side, her revolver trained on the door, her hand remarkably steady despite the chaos of the past minutes. They're bluffing, one of the outlaws behind Blackwell hissed. We can rush them. And how many of us die in the attempt? Blackwell countered coldly. No, there's another way. He raised his voice. A proposal, Mr. Morgan. Let us leave and you both walk away unharmed. The bonds are hidden where you'll never find them anyway. Not a chance, Zach replied. You've killed innocent people. It ends here. The tension stretched taut as wire, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then, faintly in the distance, came the sound they had all been dreading, hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching at speed. The law, Zara stated, relief evident in her voice. Blackwell's face hardened with the realization that his options were vanishing. In a lightning-fast movement, he raised his revolver. Zach fired first, his bullet striking Blackwell in the right arm. The outlaw leader's gun clattered to the floor as he stumbled backward with a cry of pain, colliding with his men behind him. Next one's between the eyes, Zach warned, his aim unwavering. Your choice. The fight went out of the outlaws as the approaching riders drew closer, the thunder of hooves now unmistakable. One by one, they dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. Moments later, Sheriff Davis burst through the door, followed by several deputies and men. Zara didn't recognize the Treasury agents, she presumed. Everyone all right? Davis demanded, taking in the scene with a professional eye. We're fine, Zach confirmed, lowering his weapon as the lawman secured the prisoners. Though I think Miss Whitfield here deserves most of the credit for that. Zara blushed slightly at his praise, still holding the revolver somewhat awkwardly. One of the deputies gently took it from her hands. How did you find us? She asked the sheriff. Young couple at the cafe saw you leave with Blackwell, Davis explained. Thought something seemed off about it. When they overheard one of these boys asking about a teacher at the general store, they got worried and came to me. Fortunate timing, Zach observed. We were just having a disagreement about our future plans. As the outlaws were led away in handcuffs, one of the Treasury agents approached them. Agent Lawrence, United States Treasury, he introduced himself. We've been tracking Blackwell for months. He's wanted for similar schemes in 3 states. The bonds? Zara inquired. Blackwell will tell us where they are hidden, Lawrence replied confidently. He's facing the gallows otherwise. Outside, the captured outlaws were being loaded into wagons for transport back to town. Blackwell, his wounded arm roughly bandaged, glanced once at Zara and Zach as he passed, a mixture of grudging respect and bitter resignation in his gaze. Sheriff Davis approached them as the wagons departed. You two seem to have a talent for finding trouble, he observed dryly. Or maybe it's for getting out of it. I'll be happy to avoid both for a while, Zara replied with feeling. Amen to that, Zach agreed. I'm looking forward to getting back to my quiet life with the horses. An unexpected pang shot through Zara at his words. With the immediate danger past, the reality of their situation reasserted itself. Zach had his ranch to return to, his solitary life that he clearly valued. She had her new position as teacher to prepare for. The intense connection forged through shared danger would naturally fade as they returned to normal life. The ride back to San Bernardino was subdued, both lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. By the time they reached town, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the main street. You should both get some rest, Sheriff Davis suggested as they dismounted in front of the hotel. There'll be statements to take tomorrow, paperwork to file. Of course, Zara agreed, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was now that the danger had passed. Zach nodded his thanks to the sheriff, then turned to Zara. I should check on Scout, make sure he's been properly cared for. Of course, she repeated, unable to think of anything more meaningful to say despite the tumult of emotions inside her. I'll see you in the morning, he added awkwardly. Before turning toward the livery stable, Zara watched him go, a hollow feeling expanding in her chest. After everything they had been through together, this anticlimactic parting felt wrong somehow. In her hotel room, she went through the motions of preparing for bed, her mind replaying the events of the day. The terror of the kidnapping, the standoff at the cabin, and the relief of rescue all blurred together in her memory. But clearest of all was the image of Zach, his unwavering protection, his quiet strength, and the way he had looked at her in those moments of greatest danger, as if memorizing her face. She had never believed in the romantic notion of falling in love in an instant, had always scoffed at the heroines in novels who lost their hearts so easily. Yet here she was, undeniably drawn to a man she had known for mere days, a man whose life was utterly different from anything she had known before. Was it merely the intensity of their shared experience? Would these feelings fade once life returned to normal? Or was it something deeper, more lasting? As she lay in bed, sleep eluding her despite her exhaustion, Zara came to a decision. Tomorrow she would speak with Zach honestly about her feelings. If he did not share them, at least she would know, and if he did. Well, that was a possibility too precious to ignore. In his own room, Zach paced restlessly, his thoughts in similar turmoil. Scout had been well cared for at the livery, but that minor concern had merely been an excuse to give himself space to think. Zara Whitfield had appended his carefully constructed solitude in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her courage, her intelligence, her gentle strength all had caught him unprepared. The thought of returning to his cabin alone, of resuming his solitary existence while she remained in town, created an ache he hadn't felt in years. But what could he offer her? A rough life on a small ranch, far from the comforts and society she deserved. It seemed presumptuous to even consider it. Yet the memory of her in his arms as they rode together, of her trust in him during their darkest moments, of her smile when she looked at him, these things were not easily dismissed. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would find the courage to speak his mind, to offer what little he had and hope it might be enough. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed to mock their emotional confusion. Zara dressed carefully in one of her new dresses, taking extra time with her appearance. If this was to be a day of truth between them, she wanted to face it with dignity. When she descended to the hotel lobby, she found not Zach, but Sheriff Davis waiting for her. "Good morning, Miss Whitfield," he greeted her. "Hope you slept well after yesterday's excitement." "Well enough, thank you," she replied, glancing around. "I was expecting Mr. Morgan." The sheriff's expression shifted slightly. "That's partly why I'm here. Zach asked me to give you a message, said to tell you he's gone back to his ranch to assess the damage from the outlaws' occupation. Wanted to make sure everything was secure." "Oh," Zara said, unable to hide her disappointment. "I see. He also left this for you," Davis added, handing her a folded piece of paper. "Now, if you're up to it, those Treasury agents would like to take your formal statement about Blackwell and the stagecoach robbery." "Of course," Zara agreed absently, her attention fixed on the note in her hand. The sheriff led her to his office, where Agent Lawrence and his colleagues were waiting. For the next several hours, she recounted her experiences in painstaking detail, answering their questions with as much precision as she could muster. Throughout the process, the unopened note seemed to burn in her pocket, but she resisted the urge to read it until she was alone. Finally, when the statements were complete and the agents satisfied, Sheriff Davis escorted her back to the hotel. "You've been through quite an ordeal," he observed kindly. "But you've handled yourself with remarkable courage, Miss Whitfield. This town is lucky to have you as its new teacher." "Thank you, Sheriff," Zara replied sincerely, "for everything you've done." Once alone in her room, she finally withdrew Zach's note with trembling fingers. The paper was rough, the handwriting firm but not elegant. Zara needed to check on things at the ranch. "The past days have been extraordinary in many ways. When you're settled in your new position, perhaps you'll allow me to call on you properly. Until then," Zachary Morgan. Zara read the brief message several times, uncertain how to interpret its careful formality. Was this Zach's way of creating distance between them, of returning to the proper boundaries that their unusual circumstances had breached? Or was it a genuine expression of interest in continuing their relationship on more conventional terms? The note offered no clear answers, only the suggestion of a future interaction that seemed painfully inadequate after the intensity of what they had shared. For the next week, Zara threw herself into preparations for her new role. Mayor Harrington proudly showed her the schoolhouse, a simple but well-maintained building with rows of desks, a teacher's desk at the front, and a small blackboard on the wall. Adjacent to it was the teacher's house, a cozy two-room cottage that would be her new home. She met with Reverend Simmons, who had been temporarily teaching the children, to discuss their progress and needs. She ordered books and supplies, cleaned and arranged her cottage, and tried not to think about Zach Morgan and his absence. Word of her adventure with the stagecoach robbers had spread throughout the town, elevating her to something of a local celebrity. Everywhere she went, people greeted her warmly, often stopping to introduce themselves and welcome her to San Bernardino. Through these conversations, she occasionally heard news of Zach, that he had returned to his ranch, that he was repairing damage done by the outlaws, that he had received a letter of commendation from the Treasury Department. But he did not come into town, and she did not see him. The morning she was to move into the teacher's cottage, Zara woke early, a mixture of excitement and melancholy coloring her mood. She had telegraphed her aunt in San Francisco, explaining her decision to remain in San Bernardino, and had received a supportive response. Her new life was taking shape, yet something essential seemed to be missing. As she packed her few belongings at the hotel, a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Mrs. Peterson standing in the hallway, beaming with excitement. "Good morning, dear," the shopkeeper greeted her. "I've come to help you move into your new home. Several of us ladies have prepared a little welcome for you." "That's very kind," Zara said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "We take care of our own in this town," Mrs. Peterson declared, "and you're one of us now, Miss Whitfield." The realization struck Zara with unexpected force. She had found a place here, had been accepted into this community with an openness and warmth she had never expected. Whatever happened with Zach, this town was becoming her home, with Mrs. Peterson's help, she loaded her belongings into the shopkeeper's wagon. As they prepared to depart, Sheriff Davis approached, his expression unusually mischievous. "Morning, ladies," he greeted them. "Off to the schoolhouse, indeed we are," Mrs. Peterson confirmed. "Everything ready on your end, Sheriff," Davis nodded, a smile twitching beneath his mustache. "All set." Zara glanced between them, confused by the cryptic exchange. "Is there something I should know?" "Just a little surprise," Mrs. Peterson assured her, climbing onto the wagon seat. "Come along, dear, don't want to keep everyone waiting." As they drove through town toward the schoolhouse, Zara noticed an unusual number of people heading in the same direction. By the time they reached their destination, a small crowd had gathered outside the teacher's cottage. "What's all this?" she asked, amazed by the turnout. "A proper welcome," Mrs. Peterson explained, helping her down from the wagon. "Mayor's idea." Mayor Harrington stepped forward from the crowd, his round face flushed with pleasure. "Miss Whitfield, perfect timing. We have something to show you before you settle in." He led her toward the cottage, the crowd parting to create a path. As they approached, Zara gasped in surprise. The small porch that had been weathered and plain now gleamed with fresh paint. New curtains hung in the windows, and a colorful array of potted flowers lined the steps. "The ladies' auxiliary thought your new home should be properly welcoming," Harrington explained. "But that's not all." He opened the door with a flourish, revealing a completely transformed interior. The previously sparse rooms now contained modest but attractive furniture, a comfortable chair by the fireplace, a small dining table with 2 chairs, bookshelves filled with volumes, and simple but pretty curtains at the windows. "Everyone contributed something," Mrs. Peterson said, watching Zara's reaction with satisfaction. "The Millers donated the chair, Reverend Simmons the books. The curtains are from my shop, of course." Zara turned slowly, taking in the thoughtful details that had transformed the cottage into a home. Tears pricked at her eyes as the full impact of the community's gesture washed over her. "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "This is so unexpected, so generous." "You've already given this town plenty," Sheriff Davis said from the doorway. "Standing up to those outlaws, agreeing to teach our children. Seems only fair we give something back." As the townspeople crowded into and around the small cottage, each eager to point out their contribution or offer advice on settling in, Zara felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. These people, many still strangers, had welcomed her into their community with open hearts. Only one person was missing to make her happiness complete. The thought had barely formed when a stir at the edge of the crowd caught her attention. People were stepping aside, making way for a latecomer. And then, suddenly, there he was, Zach Morgan, looking somewhat uncomfortable in a clean shirt and his best trousers, hat in hand as he approached the cottage. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, everyone else seemed to fade away. Zach's expression was uncharacteristically vulnerable, a question in his gaze that matched the one in her heart. Mayor Harrington, noting the exchange, cleared his throat loudly. "Well, folks, I think we should let Miss Whitfield get settled in. School starts on Monday and she'll need time to prepare." With knowing smiles and not-so-subtle winks, the townspeople began to file out, each stopping to welcome Zara once more. "Mrs. Peterson squeezed her hand as she passed, whispering, "He's been working on something special for you, made him promise not to miss the welcome party." Finally, only Zach remained, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room, his hat still clutched in his hands. "Your note said you'd call when I was settled," Zara said softly, breaking the silence between them. "I wasn't expecting you today." "Mrs. Peterson can be very persuasive," Zach replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Said I'd regret it if I missed this." "I'm glad you came," Zara admitted, taking a step toward him. "I've missed our conversations." "Just the conversations?" Zach asked, his voice low and uncertain. Zara's heart quickened at the question and the vulnerability behind it. "No," she said simply, "not just the conversations." Something shifted in Zach's expression, relief, perhaps, or resolve. He set his hat aside and reached for a package he had placed by the door, something long and wrapped in cloth. "I made this for you," he said, holding it out. "A housewarming gift." Curious, Zara accepted the bundle, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a beautifully crafted walking stick. The wood was polished to a warm glow, the handle smoothed and shaped to fit comfortably in her hand. Near the top, delicate carvings depicted small woodland flowers twining around the shaft. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate work. "You made this," Zach nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Thought it might be useful for walking to and from the schoolhouse. The paths can get muddy in winter." The practical excuse for such a personal gift made Zara smile. "It's perfect, thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Zach took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "I'm not good at this," he began haltingly. "At saying what I feel, being alone so long you get out of practice." "You don't have to," Zara started, but he gently raised a hand to stop her. "Please, I need to say this." He met her eyes directly. "These past 2 weeks, being back at my ranch, I kept thinking it would feel the same as before. That I'd settle back into my routines, be content with my own company again." He shook his head ruefully. "But it doesn't feel the same, nothing does." Zara's heart pounded as she waited for him to continue. "The quiet I used to find peaceful now just feels empty," Zach admitted. "And I realized it's because something's missing, someone." He took a step closer to her. "You, Zara," the simple declaration, spoken so plainly, held more meaning than the most elaborate poetry. "I don't have much to offer," he continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Just a small ranch, a simple life, and it's a fair piece out from town, which would mean a ride every day to the schoolhouse and back." "Zach," Zara interrupted gently, "are you asking me to marry you?" He blinked, momentarily thrown by her directness, then smiled a real, full smile that transformed his face. I suppose I am, he acknowledged. Not very well, though. Zara laughed, the sound bright with happiness. On the contrary, I think it's perfect. She closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his face gently. When I came west, I was looking for a new beginning, a place to belong. I never expected to find it in the middle of danger and chaos, but then I never expected you either. Zach's hands settled tentatively on her waist as if she might vanish at his touch. Is that a yes? He asked, hope evident in his voice. It's a yes, Zara confirmed, rising on her toes to bring her face closer to his. I've never been more certain of anything. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tender exploration that quickly deepened as the emotions they had held in check for days finally found expression. Zach's arms tightened around her, drawing her closer as if afraid she might slip away. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Zara Whitfield, have since that moment in the woods when you faced down those outlaws without flinching. I love you too, she replied simply. Enough to face whatever challenges come with being a schoolteacher who lives on a ranch outside of town. We'll make it work, Zach promised. I can bring you to school each morning, pick you up after, and once we're married, maybe we can build a proper house, something worthy of you. Zara shook her head, smiling. Your cabin is already worthy. It's where you are, where we'll be together. That's what matters. A knock at the open door interrupted their moment. They turned to find Sheriff Davis standing there, looking slightly embarrassed. Sorry to intrude, he said, but I thought you might want to know Blackwell and his gang are being transferred to Los Angeles tomorrow. Treasury agents got their confession, recovered most of the bonds. They won't be bothering anyone for a long time. That's good news, Zach acknowledged. Thank you, Sheriff, Davis nodded, his gaze moving between them with knowing approval. Glad to see things worked out, he said cryptically, tipping his hat before departing. Left alone once more, Zach and Zara looked at each other and laughed, the relief of closure washing over them. News travels fast in a small town, Zara observed, especially when it's been the subject of speculation for weeks, Zach agreed ruefully. Pretty sure there's been a wager going among the townspeople about us. Well, I hope Sheriff Davis won, Zara said, slipping her arms around his neck. He deserves something for all his trouble with us. Zach's expression grew serious again as he gazed down at her. Are you sure about this, Zara, about us? It won't be an easy life. I'm sure, she replied without hesitation. After everything we've been through, ordinary challenges don't seem so daunting. He kissed her again, sealing their commitment with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the future they would build together. Epilogue 5 years later, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the front porch of the Morgan ranch house as Zara rocked gently in her chair, watching her husband work with a young colt in the corral. In her arms, 3-month-old Rebecca slept peacefully, untroubled by the sounds of her 4-year-old brother Daniel's excited commentary as he perched on the fence rail, carefully supervised by Zach. The past 5 years had brought more happiness than Zara had ever thought possible. She and Zach had married 3 months after his proposal, in a simple ceremony at the San Bernardino church with the entire town in attendance. She had continued teaching for 2 years, riding to and from school with Zach each day until Daniel's impending arrival had necessitated a change. Now she taught privately, taking in students who needed extra help or advanced instruction. The arrangement allowed her to maintain her connection to education while being present for her growing family. The ranch had prospered under Zach's careful management. His reputation for quality horses had spread beyond Army contracts to include wealthy private buyers and neighboring ranches. The modest cabin had gradually expanded into a comfortable home, with Zach adding rooms as their needs grew. San Bernardino itself had continued to grow, the railroad bringing new settlers and opportunities. Sheriff Davis had eventually retired, though he still visited regularly, delighting in playing honorary grandfather to the Morgan children. Mrs. Peterson's shop had expanded to include a dressmaking service run by her daughter. Mayor Harrington had been re-elected twice, and Thomas Blackwell and his gang. They had received long sentences in a federal prison, their days of terrorizing stagecoach passengers over for good. The incident that had brought Zach and Zara together had become something of a local legend, retold with increasing embellishment at town gatherings and celebrations. As she watched Zach lift Daniel onto the colt's back for a supervised ride around the corral, Zara reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them here. From terror in the woods to this peaceful homestead, from strangers thrown together by circumstance to partners sharing a deep and abiding love, it was more than she had ever dreamed possible when she boarded that ill-fated stagecoach. Zach looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, no longer rare but still precious, warmed her heart as it had from the beginning. He said something to Daniel, then left the boy in the care of his ranch hand while he crossed to the porch. "How are my girls?" he asked, leaning down to kiss Zara softly before peering at the sleeping baby in her arms. "Perfect," Zara replied, meaning it completely. "How's the riding lesson going?" "He's a natural," Zach said proudly. "Takes after his mother, Fearless." Zara laughed. "I seem to recall you were the one who faced down 5 armed outlaws without blinking." "Only because something worth protecting was at stake," Zach replied, his voice growing serious as he gazed at his family. The statement, simple and heartfelt, captured everything that defined the man she had fallen in love with: his courage, his sense of duty, his capacity for devotion. "I've been thinking," he continued, settling on the porch step beside her chair. "Next spring, when Rebecca's a bit older, maybe we could take that trip to San Francisco you've been talking about. Visit your aunt, show the children the city." Zara smiled, touched by his consideration. Though they had exchanged letters regularly, she had not seen her aunt in person since moving to San Bernardino. "I'd like that," she agreed. "Though I have to say, every time I think of traveling, I remember that stagecoach ride." Zach chuckled, taking her free hand in his. "We'll take the train this time, much safer." "And less opportunity for adventure," she teased. "We've had enough adventure to last a lifetime," Zach replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Though I wouldn't change a moment of it, not if it led us here." As if on cue, Daniel called out excitedly from the corral, demanding his father's attention for some new equestrian achievement. Zach rose, dropping a kiss on Zara's forehead before heading back to their son. Watching him go, Zara felt a profound contentment settle over her. The path that had brought them together had been fraught with danger, but the life they had built was a testament to the strength of the bond forged in those perilous days. In her arms, Rebecca stirred, opening eyes that were the same shifting green hazel as her father's. Zara smiled down at her daughter, thinking of all the stories she would tell her children someday, stories of courage and perseverance, of finding love in the most unexpected circumstances. But most of all, she would tell them about a moment in the woods when a terrified woman ran for her life, and a solitary cowboy heard her scream and rode between her and danger, changing both their destinies forever.